Hi, I'm Nicole from Total Telecom, and today I'm here with Mychael Owen from UltramapGlobal. How are you today?
Very well, thank you.
How's the conference going? All been good this morning?
It's good. There are a lot of people here. Some of these things you come to and there are not so many people, but today's been really good.
No, good. I'm glad to hear. So Asset Monitor has been really popular at the moment. How did this happen, and how are you planning to stay in front?
I think the important thing to say is, about 14 years ago, a company called Ultramap was born. It's recently morphed to become what you said, UltramapGlobal, simply because it is a global business now. But to answer your question, Asset Monitor has somehow become the world's most used subsea cable monitoring software. And my job really is to try and tell that story in a very simple and consistent way, because for such a long time, all that Ultramap did was track how vessels endangered subsea assets and try to prevent it happening, just sent alarms. Since then, monitoring teams have built up and the business has got bigger. But to come back to your question, which I think was how did we get to where we were and how are we going to stay ahead? The business has become strangely self-sustaining for a simple reason, and it alludes to it on that thing behind me. The more customers that Ultramap and Asset Monitor have, the more data they have. And the more data they have, the more customers they get. So there's this cyclical thing, because the more data, the more effective the protection is, because we understand more about where the vessels are. So in short, over 14 years we made a promise, which was we'll protect the subsea asset, which we do, because Ultramap and Asset Monitor almost always drive cable strikes down to zero or round about zero. So delivering on that promise has helped the business to grow. And the second part of your question, the reason we're staying ahead is because the more data we get, the more customers we get, and the more customers we get, the more data we get.
Lovely. And like you said, you mentioned data is so important with UltramapGlobal and Asset Monitor. So how much data is there in your world, and exactly what are you recording?
Well, the relationship, it's actually the movement of vessels is what we're recording, and the relationship between those vessels and the subsea cables that we're being paid to protect. But on the subject of how much data, I asked Martin, one of the founders of the business, about this, because I said, look, just chuck a couple of numbers at me because I'm going to be talking to you. So I said, well, how many events per day now, like today, yesterday and tomorrow, are we actually monitoring then? How many actual vehicle movements or something happening that might cause a problem? Martin said about 100 million. So I said, no, I'm asking you a day. And he said, yeah, about 100 million a day. And it's because there are several hundreds of thousands of kilometres of subsea asset that we're looking after. But the most significant thing for me that made my eyes widen was that number, because the software, of course, just manages so much data. And probably the last thing to mention, Nicole, is because this has been happening for nearly 14 years, you can imagine how much information that's been collected over that time. It's just huge.
Yeah, so your company has been around since 2008, around 2008. So what things have changed most and what stayed the same?
The thing that's changed most with UltramapGlobal as it's called these days, I sense it's around the perception of the brand. Because when Ultramap started, as you quite rightly say, about 14 years ago, there was not on purpose, but there's a negativity around the protection of subsea cables, because you're trying to prevent something that a cable strike can cost many, many millions of pounds, and it always costs a few million quid if something, damages a cable. So what stayed the same is the threats stayed the same, but the perception around the brand has changed from being largely negative to being largely positive. And the reason is because in the early days, Ultramap Global was shining a light on all the dark and horrible things that could happen to cables. These days, because almost all the time cable strikes are reduced to almost zero, and in some cases zero, there's a very positive aura around the brand. So the threat stayed the same, but because of the track record of Ultramap Global, the aura around the brand is much more positive now, particularly when you consider the relationship between a few million quid for a cable strike and the tiny amount of investment it costs year on year to actually prevent that happening.
So Ultramap Global offers a range of 6 services. How, why and when did this range develop?
So it all started with software development. So software development back in the day was the supporting service that created Asset Monitor. And now the core services in the business are twofold. It's Asset Monitor, the world's most used subsea cable monitoring software, plus the monitoring services. So I've mentioned 3 now: software development, Asset Monitor itself, and the monitoring services. The monitoring services are in 3 different locations around the world, and it's simply because the more effective, remember I'm up to 3, you keep me posted. So what happened, Nicole, was the software was really effective at flagging problems, and customers were really grateful to understand the threats to their subsea assets, largely cables. But they didn't have the resources to react to the threats. So responding to what customers wanted, over the last 5 to 10 years, Ultramap Global has developed monitoring teams. There are 20 to 30 people now around the world who are constantly watching, okay? So that's how 3. The 4th one is Ultramap Data Services. Data services is an accidental business. When you, as you pointed out, because you were kind enough to ask the question, when you're collecting so much data over so long, you've got all this hugely intelligent information that goes back over a decade, of course, that shows patterns and how, if people want to lay new cables, I suppose, or if people want to understand threats to existing assets, they can go back over the data and learn from that. 4. The 5th one is, I'm going to mention partner services, okay? Because there are certain things that clients want that Ultramap Global wouldn't do in-house. For example, guard vessels. So we partner with, I suppose we term them category leaders, people who are the best at what they do, alongside the best at what we do. What's the other one? You're not listening, so you won't know.
I'll let you off for the 6th one.
It'll come back to me. Next question.
Yeah, no worries. So this year, Ultramap Global has had a major change in its branding, changing its logo, the names, adding some new services. Can you tell us a bit more about those changes?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the thing that changed most, when a business gets bigger and more established, oftentimes the things that it says become overly complex and just a little bit spaghetti-like. So we decided to pause and shrink back to simplicity, because the greatest brands in the world are very simply communicated and very consistently communicated. Ultramap Global is really about one word, and it's surety. It's the fact that if you're investing tens of millions of pounds in a subsea infrastructure, you want it protecting. And there's I mentioned earlier, the perceptions around the brand have shifted. At the beginning, we were seen as insurance. These days, we're seen as assurance. So we talk about security in an insecure world, and the surety around just understanding the threat, and then, most importantly, stopping the threat before it happens. And I still can't remember the 6th service.
Don't worry about it. I'll let you off. So, in a nutshell, finally, just to finish, what is Ultramap Global famous for? And obviously you've been here with all of these people today. What do you reckon that people are saying about Ultramap Global?
Okay, I mean, it's a really good question, because arguably all a brand is what people say about you when you're not there. And I'm going to repeat myself, and it's kind of, if you don't mind, it's not like I apologise. It's because the brand is so finely tuned now, we kind of know what we're for, and it is this surety, and it's assurance, it's peace of mind. These are all the things that the customers around the world, and we are tracking billions of events now, over the years of course, in every ocean of the world. What they're buying from us is surety. And the thing that we said quite recently, and this perhaps sums up what we think people are saying about us out there, because we were saying it about ourselves, is some people, they think that their cables are protected, but others they actually know, because there's just so much surety built into the brand. So in short, it's surety.
No, thank you so much for that, and I hope you enjoy your rest of the day. Thank you.